Today on the 01581, a conversation with Senator Moore, and our town manager will give us an update. Join us. Hi, and welcome to today's show of the 01581 Let's Talk. I'm joined by regular guest, Senator Micheal Moore. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, so lots to talk about. Let's get right into it. So one of the first areas that I know you've been working on, the town is acutely aware of, is the crisis that we're seeing with immigration, compounded by a housing shortage, which we've heard about for a long time now, certainly exacerbated from COVID. So maybe just kind of an update on where things are at, from your lens. I know you've been working hard with your colleagues across the state and certainly with our town officials, which is greatly appreciated, to address this crisis. But kind of from your lens, where are we at? Then we'll get into maybe some vision of solutions.
Well, from my end, and I think most of my other colleagues, it's really just trying to make sure that the communities that are having to deal with this issue, getting the resources that they need to deal with it, and making sure that we can make sure the funding is going to follow to cover the additional costs that the communities have to deal with.
Yeah.
We've had great success, or I should say the communities have been great to deal with as far as implementing or allowing the migrant children to get into the school system. But we've also had the issue where the communication has not been the best with the administration in the local communities as far as notifying them to come in when they're being transported into the communities or relocated.
Right.
And look, some of that is the fact that when they're landing in that Logan, it's after hours. So the administration is having the problem where they're literally going on to the websites trying to find hotel space. And then cities and towns that, I'll say more of the smaller cities and towns, but I guess even the city of Worcester. The city manager's office or the town manager's office close at 5 o'clock. So who do you then notify? So we've been trying to work that out and try to get better ways of streamlining the notification. So we're working on that, the funding. The other issue is, I think, more of a broader issue of when is it going to stop? And
and everyone, that I talk with, not that I talk with everyone, doesn't see an end in sight.
And
it's the view is that it's certainly exacerbated by a state law, unlike New York City, which has a city law around right to shelter, but we have a state law that says right to shelter, right? So women and children within 24 to 48 hours, have to be given housing, and that creates a magnet for, Massachusetts is the magnet.
So when New York first started dealing with this issue before we did, if you and the community remembers, at one point the mayor of New York threatened that they were going to rescind the law. The federal government ended up coming in, giving some additional relief. The governor declared the state of emergency.
Governor Healy.
Governor Healy declared the state of emergency. We really haven't seen any additional help from the feds.
Right. I was going to ask you that.
So we really haven't seen that. That's been noticeable. We have, I should say, I went to a conference where one day was dealing with immigration. And one thing I did learn is that, we keep hearing the administration asking for waivers to the work visa. The problem is, and this is going to tie into the bigger issue of immigration. It's not a federal regulation. The work visa is actually by statute. So what the individual from the Department of Justice told me when I asked the question was, if we want to, that the president cannot waive that. You need legislation to pass through Congress.
Well,
And
forget about that.
Exactly. And
I'm
so
sorry.
that's the issue. Now, supposedly, it was just out in the media yesterday, or I think it was over the weekend. We heard that the Attorney General may have found, or is looking at, some Massachusetts Attorney General's office is looking at some legal
Pathways.
pathway or theory on
Yeah.
how to utilize a temporary work visa. So we'll see how that goes. But
Like a state temporary work visa
Yes,
or a federal?
state.
Okay.
for state.
yeah.
So again, so now this ties into the immigration. So Massachusetts is the only state. It passed it back in, I think it was 1983.
Yeah.
And obviously, with this was an issue, it was intended for the residents of Massachusetts. If a family or
Sure.
became homeless,
Sure.
now because of and I hate to criticize another branch of government, but because of inaction on immigration.
Yeah, well,
You know,
I
this
think that's
is-
fair criticism.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's, we like to be sometimes balanced in our criticism and fair, but it is inaction over administration after administration. This is not a
Yeah.
Republican or a Democratic issue. This
no,
this is a national issue.
If you go back to, and I'm going to think the last immigration reform, was that Ronald Reagan when he was in office with Tip O'Neill and
It may have been. I don't know.
So, all right, so that's how far back
Yeah,
we're talking.
a long time.
That we haven't had immigration reform.
Yep.
So, and if you think about some of the issues that the state over the last,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say the last 10, 15 years that I've been in office, we've had to deal with non-citizens or undocumented people getting licenses.
Yep.
We've had to deal with the in-state tuition. There were certain things that if the federal government
Yep.
was fulfilling their responsibility
Sure.
in working on some sort of, whether it's a pathway or dealing with reforming
Sure.
in the immigration process, we wouldn't be here.
Sure.
But now the problem is we have the Massachusetts citizens or taxpayers right now, out of as you stated, out of the 50 states, we're the only state right now that we are having to bear the financial burden of this issue.
Yeah.
The last press announcement, I think the governor said it was roughly $45 million a month that we're spending.
Yeah,
So
it's not sustainable.
it's not. So this is where, if the federal government is not going to follow through
Yeah.
with some sort of funding, can we still have that law in place or fully
Right.
implement that law? Do we need to, with a state of emergency,
Sure.
does the governor need to suspend it? Or,
Sure.
But now, again, tying it back to the federal government,
Yep.
what are we seeing right now? We're seeing a possible shutdown of government.
Right.
So
Yeah.
can we expect additional resources? I don't know.
Yeah. What about is there a possibility of Massachusetts amending? What would it take is a fair question. What would it take for Massachusetts to amend its right to shelter law? This isn't going to be a popular statement with a lot of viewers, but to
I
amend
agree.
it
I even
to
hate
only
talking about it.
to
Yeah.
not apply to non-citizens.
Well, I think based on what we saw with COVID, when the state of emergency is called, I believe that gives the governor the authority to waive us from certain state statutes.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, I think that's one of the benefits of declaring a state of emergency.
Okay.
So you could, at that point,
Okay.
she could go back and revisit this and
Sure.
maybe enact whether it's restrictions or
Sure.
an outright ban on it,
Yeah.
or suspension until we get some federal assistance.
But then
But the thing about it, if we do that, that might force the feds
Yeah.
to actually come up and give us some assistance. But then the problem you have is we've got, and I don't mean to be partisan when I say this,
Yeah.
but we've had all the red states for years that have been complaining about immigration and the border,
Yep.
and now we're having to deal with it. So is the other side in Washington now relishing the fact?
Sure, right? Like, well, now you feel our pain, right?
Right.
You feel our pain and deal with it for a while. And I mean, look, I have no problem saying that the national legislature is highly dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And yet, folks like myself, yourself, if you take off your senator hat, I take off my select board hat, that, we're like frustrated.
Yeah.
Fix it. like come to some sort of resolution that, you know, is a compromise and which, you know, protects the integrity of the United States still being a welcoming country, recognizing the power of immigration, the power that it brings to the economy, the power it brings to us as a country, always has. But fix it.
Well, and that's just.
I know it's not easy. I know it's like at all.
But this is the ironic thing about this is that if you look at everyone talks about they want us to have a strong economy.
Yep.
And we need to have a strong economy, obviously, if we want government to operate in services. And but we have no matter what policy area that we look at, we have a severe staffing shortage. We don't have enough workers.
It's true.
And the birth rate, we're not keeping up with enough of it. We've got the baby boomers, one of the largest demographics, are leaving the workforce.
Absolutely.
So we've got an economy built upon that, workers built upon that. Yep. Now, to backfill that, we need immigration.
Right.
So there is long term, there is some benefit to this.
Yep. Absolutely.
But the short term is dealing with it, and this is where the federal government needs to come in.
Sure.
And they need to assist. Sure. And especially, look, if Massachusetts is the only state that's going to do this, I mean, there needs to be an example set in Washington that states that are going to work with the immigration issues and try to resolve the workforce issues. Washington needs to set an example and help fund some of these initiatives.
Sure.
They can't just let the state or the city of New York languish and have to deal with these issues by themselves.
And I guess I'm sitting here really not asking you to answer this question, but if the feds aren't going to help, and if it gets to a breaking point, and I'm not sure what that is, but I can't imagine it's far on the horizon at $45 million a month, and the state of emergency allows the governor to enact, like, just to shut the door, so to speak. What, really rhetorical question, what happens to those people still coming here, still somehow arriving on a flight or getting a bus or however they're getting here, which is a whole other conversation we could have. They're here. What do we do? Pay for their ticket back? I mean, I'm not being like. Yeah, no. That's
a good question. So we're being told. I think the last update we had to expect 1,000 a month.
Yeah.
So if we're going to continue with that pace, I don't know. Maybe once. I shouldn't say once, but if there are some restrictions put on it, maybe we see the tide stop or it dwindles. I mean, I don't know.
Right. Well, I think there are many people that would say if the doors open, people are going to come and they're going to come. You've got to shut the doors and at this point, I would be more supportive of that. At the same time, it's like the walk and chew gum. Let's talk about, is there a temporary work visa? I mean, I believe in my whole heart, and based having met some of these families, they just want a better life for themselves. They are fleeing horrific conditions. Yes. And I believe that we've got to have the structure in place through laws or whatever. We've got to have the structure that supports that effective migration strategy to Massachusetts.
And talking to some of the housing advocates, based on past practice, before the migrant issue arose, when you had people that were in need of housing, if you could get them to work, the emergency housing, I think it was around 6 to 7 weeks that they would move out of the emergency housing. But when the fact that we can't do that now, that really hinders it. So this is where, if the Attorney General can be creative and she really has found a loophole or a way to utilize a temporary work visa, and we can that may help in the long term solve the issue of the housing. But until then, now we've got.
But we do have a housing shortage, right? So it's one thing to say, okay, great, put money in pockets, help the economy, help businesses, kind of rising tide, raise all boats. But people need a place to live. Yeah. And, rent, availability of housing. I mean, I do think one of the elements we need to think about is what's happening beyond the 128, 495 belts. Like, what are we doing to look at Massachusetts as a whole state, not just like a condensed, area?
And this is where it's going to be interesting because and I know this is going off.
Yeah. No,
So we have a rent control ballot initiative that has been approved by the governor, by the attorney general.
Yep.
I don't know all the specifics of it.
Yeah.
But I do know I was quickly reading a summary of some legal arguments back and forth. When we look at the fair share, the first fair share amendment that before it went to the ballot that got approved by the Attorney General, the Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional because it addressed two policy areas in the same ballot question.
Oh, interesting. Yep.
So that's why it was struck.
You're speaking of the rent control specifically.
Well, so this was the fair share.
Yep.
So then we had the second fair share, which is passed because it only addressed one area.
Okay.
So the rent control, the argument I heard from the opponents of it were that there were several of those policy areas. So even though the Attorney General has said it's constitutional, if they move that to the state Supreme Court, now that could be an issue. That could be grounds for an issue that the court now says, "Oh, look, you have too many issues, policy areas that you're addressing." So, so that could be something that the advocates may not be looking at. Now, the other issue too is, and I'm going to use the city of Worcester as an example. Sure. There were years that the city of Worcester, the only housing they could get were developers coming in with affordable housing.
Sure.
Because the difference in profit margin for the affordable housing and the market rate wasn't that much different. So there was no incentive for a developer to come in with the market rate housing.
Okay.
Which, and I don't want this to sound the way it's going to sound, but I guess if you look at market rate housing, when you have individuals moving in with market rate housing, that can be a little bit more expensive, has more surplus income, which then those individuals can then go out into the community and spend more. And now, so Worcester finally now has been successful. If you look at, we've got Ruth Chris has come in, we've got better hotels coming in.
Sure.
So the economy has been booming.
Yep.
Now we have the issue is now we have community members that are opposing it, and rightfully so. The cost of apartments and housing has gone up.
Sure.
Which I guess in some ways you can say that's the direction they were trying to move in.
Right.
And now it's an issue.
Right. Now it's at a place of, whoa, wait a second. I didn't mean to maybe move that fast or to that level or what have you.
The salaries and the income hasn't kept up. Now the other issue too, the other argument with rent control is, and I was just at a legislative breakfast last Friday for this, the Central Mass Realtors Association. They have their they have their legislative breakfast every year. And we have a colleague who was a state rep who's a developer. And he actually, when the whole issue of rent control came up, his comment was, look, I'm a developer. I'm not going to come in and I'm not going to build new housing if I've got a cap and I'm not going to get the return on my investment. So I understand the concept of it, but at the same time, if a rent control package is passed, does it actually reduce the amount of or hurt the development more affordable housing? Or more housing? Because we just have a low inventory anyways.
Right.
So it's not the answer for this isn't just
that it's the silver bullet for sure. Right. It certainly has pros and cons. Let's just in the time we have, because we certainly could talk for a while, but I know that you've been spending a lot of time. Certainly, have seen. You've been in the news recently. And
on an issue that I probably, if you would ask me 3 or 4 years ago, was not an issue I was very involved in.
Right. So this is the Cannabis Commission.
Yes.
I think we have time to talk about kind of, I think, 2 areas under that. One is the what you've been working on, kind of amending some draft regulations, and just kind of what's going on there, because there's been some shakeup.
Yeah. So I can tell you, but before the redistricting, I represented the town of Leicester. I had a company come in that was having a horrible time dealing with the cannabis.
It was one of our first shows. We talked about it.
So So that's really how I get started interacting with the Cannabis Control Commission. Now, since then, last legislative session, we did a reform.
Can I back you up? What is the purpose of the Cannabis Control Commission, known as the CCC?
So the Cannabis Control Commission, similar to like the Gaming Commission,
Okay.
they're the oversight for the cannabis control, if you want to say the regulatory, the executive director
Okay.
and the investigators. And
Okay.
now they also, the Cannabis Control Commission, and actually the next 3 days, they're actually continuing. They developed the original regulations
Okay.
for the medical
Okay.
and then the recreational.
Okay.
And they're supposed to oversee the agency beneath them.
Okay.
So the executive director and the staff.
Okay.
And the staff are the ones that go out and do the regulatory enforcement
Okay.
and
Okay.
investigations.
Okay. Thank you.
So the problem we had is, which is the same structure that we've had for the Gaming Commission.
Which is working well.
Which
you
is
would
working
say.
well.
Okay. Yep.
But for some reason, this agency, we have the executive director and the staff are actually in mediation, and they've been in mediation since April of 2022, disputing the authority of the Cannabis Control Commission over they claim there are limitations, or they're trying to establish limitations on their oversight authority.
And what? So I don't know this. The executive.
The executive
director, and are those appointed positions or?
The Cannabis Control Commission hires and fires the executive director.
Okay.
So in theory, I would
Yeah.
think similar to other state boards or commissions.
Yeah.
That kind of, to me, it's where
Pretty
you're
clear.
Yeah, we're your
Yeah.
boss.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like select board and town manager, right?
Yes.
Pretty clear.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
Right,
So it's
right.
pretty clear.
Yep.
But we've got a dispute on. So it's actually kind of funny. So it's my understanding that it's not funny. It's actually
Yeah,
sad.
yeah. No, of course, yeah,
That
no.
it's my understanding. I think the last estimate was maybe $600,000 in legal fees have been paid, or maybe $300,000. I'm confusing that. That right now they're operating.
And not stopping, right?
It's not stopping.
It's not resolved.
Well, and actually, the Cannabis Control Commission now has a $600,000 deficit in their budget. Yet, if you were to go on the state website,
Okay.
there's several key positions in their administrative offices that are unfilled. So another question I have, which I haven't brought up, and I'm hoping will be addressed in what I'm looking for the oversight hearing, is how do you have a deficit of $600,000 when some of your key administrative positions aren't filled?
Even filled.
What is that money being spent on?
Yeah, yeah.
So the
Yeah,
issue
great question.
the issue we have is that we've last legislative session we did a minor law change, which we addressed the whole issue with host communities and the host community agreements and what they
Yep.
can be, who oversees that and all that. But there was also one change that was made to the hiring prerequisites.
Okay.
In Schedule A, which deals with the owners, there's a restriction that sex offenders or people in certain classifications cannot be owners.
Okay.
So we did a slight change based on an amendment filed by one of my colleagues, whose my understanding, the change was recommended by one of the commissioners.
Okay.
Where they didn't want to have 30 different crimes or convictions that were listed there.
Yep.
So what they did is the recommendation on the amendment, which did pass, was
Yep.
that anyone convicted of distribution of a controlled substance to a minor, including marijuana, was restricted from working as a
In a lab.
in the retail
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
or
Yep.
the delivery
Yep,
process.
yep.
So that person behind the counter when you come in,
Yep.
if you're a woman or you could be just anyone who's
Yeah.
you're presenting your license
Yep. ID. Yep. Yep.
ID. Now the person knows where you live, your age, what other information they can find out from that information. Now,
Sure.
Do you really want that? Say it's a level 2 or 3 sex offender having that information, and then or that person be a driver who's now delivering that to
Right,
your
because
to your
yep,
house.
Yep. Yep.
So what? So
So some of the tweaks that have been made have not addressed this problem.
well,
which is
so
what-
the issue was that with that one restriction on distribution, there was also language, kind of a coverall language that said or a conviction dealing with the public safety, health, and welfare of the public.
Okay.
So that was kind of a catch-all. This
Sure.
way, they left some flexibility.
Yep.
You didn't have to go through
yeah.
the general laws and name 100 different statutes.
Right.
But now it's coming back and saying, oh well, because it's not listed there, we can't exclude that.
Yeah.
So the question I asked at the commission when I testified,
Sure.
what does that language mean?
Yep.
If you're saying you can't
Right.
on a sex offender offense, then that language is worthless.
Right,
And
right.
so the argument the legal position we're making is the fact that similar to like the registry of motor vehicles,
Mm-hmm.
if you get a criminal conviction based on something you did driving, you then you get that criminal conviction, but then you then go to the registry.
Yep.
They can administratively, through a civil process, take your license away. So my position is that the Sex Offender Registry Board, SORB, Sex Offender Registry Board, even when you do someone's criminal history check, say the police or an employer, there's the criminal history check. Then you have to go to a separate database, the SORB database, to find out if someone's a sex offender.
Okay.
And then the process of your classification is a civil process.
Okay.
I'm of the opinion that you could still have those restrictions because it's not part of the criminal process. It's a civil administrative process that the Cannabis Control Commission can, in theory, say someone with a level 1, 2, or 3 classification
yeah.
can't work there.
Sure.
So that's the dispute I'm having with them right now. The other issue now is, as you pointed out at the start of the show, what's going on with the chair of the commission. The chair was just recently suspended. We don't know why. The treasurer, so basically the commission's made up of the treasurer has one appointment, the governor has an appointment, the attorney general has an appointment, then the next two are made from a collaboration of all
I
three.
remember, yeah.
All right. So now, by statute, the only way a commissioner can be terminated, it says.
And just to be clear, the chair has not been terminated, suspended.
Correct.
Yep, so go ahead. Yep.
So in the statute, we don't see, there's no language about suspension or putting on leave
Sure.
But it does say, if a commissioner is guilty of malfeasance in office, I haven't heard that.
Yep.
Substantially neglects the duties of a commissioner,
Okay.
haven't heard that, is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office, commits gross misconduct, or is convicted of a felony. So the treasurer has suspended her, but we don't know
And
why.
I'm sorry, it is the treasurer's appointment,
The treasurer,
chair?
yeah, the treasurer makes the appointment of the chair.
Interesting.
So we don't know why.
Okay.
So the other issues that we're dealing with over the last several years is that the suspension issue. There's the issue I just talked about. There's ongoing governance issues. That's the whole mediation.
Yep.
We've got lengthy delays. And when a company is trying to get their license,
Sure.
not just the manufacturer, we got manufacturers, retailers
Sure,
trying to open,
sure. Yep.
and we also have the issue with we've had many complaints from Cannabis Control. We've had many complaints from the entities dealing with the Cannabis Control Commission, not the commission itself, but the body underneath.
Yeah, the body actually overseeing the industry.
Yeah. The tactics of the investigators, that it seems like they're more criminal investigators than regulatory, that there's a real
Sure.
culture and attitude that
Interesting.
if you look at, and look, I am one person, but
Yeah.
I would think most people would agree that this is a new industry. We got we got a regulatory body, there's new regulations, and even with these roadblocks that they're creating, it's between a $3 and $5 billion industry. Yet we have industries coming back that the investigators are coming in like criminal investigators. They're not, rather than helping you with your company, look, I'm trying to open a business. These are the issues we have to come in compliance with.
Sure.
It's more of a gotcha type.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be doing that.
Sure.
We've
Well,
got,
it's a legal, not illegal, a legal industry now.
Yes.
So you're right. I mean, to me, common sense would say the criminal element comes after an explanation of here's what you need to do to get your business going. I mean, it'd be like on a simple level, here in a town, the community development director and team, planning board, etc., like provide guidance. They tell this is how you're going to do it. This is how you have to do your sewer hookup. Not how you do it, but
Right.
here's what you're going to do. If you don't do it legally, and we've given you that instruction from a regulatory, then it becomes, fines or what have you. But
Right.
it's not a criminal activity by initial omission or mistake.
We had one lab that was in the, there was an article in the TNG, and I think they had an article in the Globe when it first happened. MCR Labs, I think it was. They talked about how aggressively these people came in with if I remember correctly, the verbal abuse, the tactics they were physically, there was contact, and the aggressiveness of it. Now, again, the commission, the executive director and the commission, not the commission, the executive director came out and said, we're going to do investigation, and if we find inappropriate conduct, we will then address the issue. It's been silence.
Any reports on that?
No reports. We had someone that died out at a facility out in the western part of the state.
I remember hearing that, yeah.
There's a lot of from what I was told from some people, that the commission was never even told about it, the death, until it actually hit the media. So there's a lot of issues that have to be addressed, and I'm hoping. So the letter I had sent that made a media yesterday was that we have the Cannabis Control Commission, the Cannabis Control Policy Committee in this House and Senate. It's a joint committee. Yeah. Every committee can do an oversight hearing, so that they conduct an oversight hearing. But also, now when I first filed the legislation back in January, it was to create an Inspector General unit attached to the Cannabis Control Commission, similar to what we did with the state police, that they work out of they're assigned to work within the agency, but they don't report to the agency. But they monitor and they look at all the policies, regulatory enforcement, all these things. Now, because of what has continued to happen, I'm actually pushing. I'd like to see I think the unit is still needed, but I also do think we need to have an oversight hearing on the conduct. Now, the only difference between there's also, we also have, and I chaired this commission last legislation. It's the post-audit and oversight. The only difference there is they actually have subpoena authority. Okay. I'm not sure if a joint committee does an oversight, if they have it. Yep. So that might be an issue that if this goes forward, we need to elevate it to. But I think there's going to be a lot more. Oh, then the other thing is that in part of this, I did notify the auditor's office, asking them to come in, because there's been I did receive a call from some employees that were women, that they were complaining about, not of sexual, but they were complaining of aggressive tactics or hostile work environment and threats that were made to them. I think the number now
by their employers, or
by not the commissioners, by again within the agency.
Within the agency.
So now the auditor, we sent the referral to her. I spoke to her yesterday. She did say that they would make this part of their audit. So this could be another example of.
So the, that multi-billion-dollar industry potential, I'm seeing that great potential, and all of this failing oversight, and I appreciate your work on it, quickly eating into the tax revenue benefit.
Yeah. Well, it makes you wonder though. Look at the roadblocks that they're creating, the bureaucracy and the roadblocks. How big could this industry have actually really flourished to?
Sure.
Think about this. If you had your own business.
Yeah.
You're an entrepreneur. You're looking at what business am I looking at maybe going into Massachusetts?
Sure.
Why would I go into that industry?
No, yeah.
I was speaking to an owner last night.
Sure.
He was talking about how many people have lost their personal investments because of the conduct of this agency. Sure. Yeah. That's not right. But we want people to come. We want people to start businesses. We want to grow and provide employment opportunities and good jobs. Right. You're not going to have that if this reputation continues.
Well, okay.
Okay. Did we exceed the minutes?
No, but that's okay. That's so appreciate all of this, and we could talk for a while, and we will. So next time, I'm sure there'll be an update on the CCC and your work there. And I haven't seen you in a while, so all of our guests now get a sticker
Thank you.
that you can proudly display someplace.
I can put it right in my office.
There you go. So thank you
very
for
much.
being a regular guest. You only get one, though. You don't get one every
yeah,
week.
all right.
Unless you ask for it, we might make an exception for you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all that you do. Thanks
My
for
pleasure.
being on again. Thanks so much for joining this episode of the 01581. And we'll hear in just a moment from our town manager. Be right back. Hi, and welcome back to the 01581. I'm joined by Town Manager Kristi Williams. Kristi, hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much for jumping on to the back half of the show here. Appreciate that. So I think you have an update for our viewers on some important topics and meetings coming up that they want to be aware of.
Yeah. So one thing, we have the select board meeting on the 26th of September, and at that meeting, the golf club building reuse committee is going to be making their recommendations to the board related to the use of that building.
Okay.
And that's right in line with the charge that the board had given them to report back by October 1st. So
Sure.
really excited to hear that recommendation. Also, the senior needs assessment that came out earlier this year, the assistant town manager had led a working group, which you're a part of,
Yep.
to develop a 5-year implementation plan.
Right.
And so that will be presented in October
Okay.
at one of the select board meetings
Yes.
as well.
Yep.
So, but I think what a lot of people are talking about is the community center.
Yes.
And so we expect to have follow-up discussion at the select board meeting on the 26th. We've been really I've been working with the board to sort of identify questions that folks are asking in
Sure.
the community so that we can really be responsive to
Yep.
some of the questions.
Sure.
So the presentation at the select board meeting will be in follow-up to some of those questions, and then the board will talk a little bit more about additional meetings and
Sure.
public information sessions that we want to have.
Sure. And then we also have this week, the week that we're taping here, the budget summit is
Yes.
also taking place, which is a public meeting. And what's the purpose of that? Just so
Yep.
the public may not be aware we have
Sure.
that.
So we've been doing the budget summit for a few years. It's we also call it a tri-board meeting. So it's the select board, advisory finance committee, and school committee. The purpose of it is really to talk about the closeout of the prior fiscal year, any updated estimates for the current fiscal year, and then really looking ahead, thinking about budget pressures that we might see coming. Because even though annual town meeting won't happen until March, we're already starting to get ready for our budget season,
Absolutely.
putting it together.
Yeah.
So something different this year for the budget summit, which we haven't done in the past, is that we intend to talk a little bit about some upcoming warrant articles for October town meeting. Specifically, we'll talk with the school committee about what the school article related to the air conditioning of the gym.
Right.
And then we'll probably talk more about the community center.
Sure.
Just really making sure that we're having those conversations so that we can answer questions.
Sure. So yeah, and I will say as a board member, those budget summit tri-board meetings have been extremely helpful to be able to hear the questions coming from different lenses of the school committee or the finance committee, and as well to certainly hear from your staff and to hear those presentations and have it be it's a filmed event, so and the public is welcome to attend the meeting and listen, but it's a little bit more of a relaxed environment. I don't know that your staff feel that way, but I feel like that way, and it's a great opportunity to ask questions, and we have a little bit more time that's allocated than maybe kind of a traditional kind of agenda. So anyway, those are great, and I think for folks that take the time to watch them, they really get a sense of the planning that goes into to your point, the closeout as well as the planning. So that's great.
To your point about additional staff making presentations, Maureen Amyot from the library will be making a
great.
presentation update on kind of what's going on with the library building committee.
Great. And I know that also has been part of some of those questions that we're getting around the community center. Right. How does it affect that project, et cetera? And I do want to thank the public for their questions that are coming in. I think I know I'm getting them. Kristi certainly is getting them. And I think it's important because the more that we can all understand what the questions are, not to say that all of them can be answered.
Right.
The better prepared I think we'll be when we're at town meeting in October.
Yep.
So, great.
Good.
Awesome. Well, lots going on, and we're in full swing of town meeting and just to your point, the budget planning process. When does that start? Just if you can let kind of viewers know for the next fiscal year.
So we've already reached out to departments asking for their capital requests. So those are due back beginning of October. And then in the next month, we'll ask departments to start putting their budgets together for fiscal 25. And then, we start those meetings internally in November, and then the budget will be ready for the public December 21st.
I was going to say,
or sooner if we can.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, so all of the past budgets are available online. We have literally award-winning budget documents.
That's right.
The GFOA,
Yes.
did I get that right? And so we've received that for outstanding achievement in kind of the budget process and packaging. And that really has made, I think, a difference for the public to understand that process. And really impressed with the way that you and your team have continued to build on that with some other processes, particularly around capital improvements and projects. So it's good.
Thanks.
All right, well, more to come. Thank you so much for joining into this episode of the 01581. Look forward to being here next week. Take care, be well, and take care of each other.